Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the UBC Learning Circle, hosted by the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health. Today, I'm really excited. We're here to welcome Sandy, Frank, Henry over distance, and Dega to talk to us or to have a dialogue about healthy Indigenous masculinity and their work at the Dudes Club. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional, ancestral, unceded, and occupied territories of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. I would also like to acknowledge the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the circle and kind of what it is we do here. So quick introductions from our team before we get started. My name is Cole. I'm from the Chawatha First Nation, and I'll be facilitating the session today. So for the most part, just kind of sitting and listening to what you guys have to say. Other Learning Circle team members off camera today are Cynthia, our production coordinator, and Kaylin, our program assistant. As a quick reminder, before we kind of jump into it, for everyone participating today, the topics we cover can sometimes be sensitive or emotionally triggering. If that's you for today, I implore you, please talk to a friend, elder, counselor, family member, whatever it is that you need to feel safe and to access the conversation. I urge you to do so. So, with that being said, I think I'll turn the mic over to you guys if we want to maybe start with a brief introduction so everybody knows who's who, and we can go from there.
Tansei, my people come from the Tall Cree First Nation in Fort Vermilion, Alberta. I'm the elder and external liaison for Dudes Club and been with the project for 8 years. Did I say my name?
No.
My name's Sandy Lambert. Sorry.
There we go.
That's what happens when you're famous. You don't have to say your name.
Notoriety.
Wonderful. What ko no orado zo bagoygon tagatsitsuna kana yojat sa kanya kahaga kana wakerdono ni dokanyo tano waskerde wage sosko hone wakiterdo. So my name is Degatsitsunaga Everest. I hail from the Mohawk Nation of Gatnawage. I'm a proud member of the Bear Clan from our Soskohone bloodline, and I am the regional coordinator for Dudes Club. Morning, everyone. My name is Frank Cohn. I'm the program director at Dudes Club, and my people come from Eastern Europe. My grandparents and great-grandparents were refugees who came over. I spent a lot of my work internationally and speak a number of different languages, none of which are our Indigenous languages here. And I also just wanted to mention we honored the territory that we're on right here, and just also honoring the territory that our men are working on throughout BC and throughout Canada, and all of those territories that are in varying stages of occupation and ownership and reclaiming and re-identifying with the lands that peoples were historically on.
And Henry, do you want to introduce? Well, I guess that's kind of. But Henry, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, my name is Henry Morgan. Kitsap Nation. I work with First Nations Health Authority here as the Men's Health and Wellness Coordinator.
Great, thanks, Henry. So we have a slideshow, I guess, to sort of get us started. I think maybe a good place is maybe kind of what is the Dudes Club for everybody that's really fresh to this conversation.
Yeah. So the Dudes Club is a brotherhood for men's wellness, and we have partners out there: Canadian Men's Health Foundation. We also have First Nation Health Authority, and we also partner with St. Paul's Hospital Foundation. So thank you for those collaborators and partners we partner with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we'll be rolling through a slideshow as we sit through this time together, but we'll also just be jumping into some different conversation topics as we go through as well. And we'll be speaking to some of the work that we do with a bit of a high-level overview, but we're definitely available to zoom into any particular aspect if there's people out there who have questions or comments. So the Dudes Club way of being is really about connection. For us, when we identify what's the single most important thing that we work on, well, we know that men, and in particular men in Indigenous communities and in often lower income communities, have the lowest health outcomes of different groups in Canada. And we know that there's reasons for that, historical and current political and social reasons. And we identify that if we can address the social isolation that exists for a lot of these men and build connection, then we can improve those health outcomes. We recognize that social isolation has come about as a result of colonial historical processes and poverty and loss of land, and therefore reconnecting. So a healthy man is connected to himself, to his physical and mental well-being, to his family, to the land that he's on and the land that his people are from, to his culture, to his community, and to his spirituality and ancestors. So we work to restore this balance and connection.
So there are different ways of being a man in our society. There are these very strong requirements of masculinity. We are trying to break down those rigid walls and have guys connect on a much broader level. It's okay to take off your armor. And that was by Dr. Paul Gross, who is a co-founder and medical doctor for Dudes Club.
Yeah, I think to add to that, the idea of masculinity itself and the kind of societal narratives that play at that are, we experience them every day, and we kind of have to be challenged by those. And so this idea of being tough and unbreakable and show no vulnerability, these are very dangerous, toxic narratives that continue to kind of spread in our communities, and be it Indigenous communities or any community for that matter. They're perpetuated, and I think with the work that the Dudes Club does, and I shouldn't even say Dudes Club, the work that the men do within the communities begin to challenge that, and in a space, a safer space to question what does that narrative mean for the community? I think more importantly, what does that narrative mean for each of those individuals, and to begin looking at what does the community need? What is the narrative that the community wants, and how to readdress or redress that work, so that each community, being unique in their own, begin to support the men, and the men support each other to reintroduce what the needs of a man in that community and the role of a man in that community mean. Mm-hmm.
So the mission of our group, and I want to reinforce something that Dega just mentioned, this is the work that local men are doing. We are supporting that work. And that's really key to emphasize, because we're a small group of part-time people based here in the big smoke of Vancouver, and we are not on the ground in community on a day-to-day basis. Henry is much more so than we are, but even still, he's not there on a day-to-day. He's popping in once a month to different communities, but it's the men on the ground. And so we see our role and our mission to facilitate a participant-led community for men's wellness with local activity-based clubs that prioritize supportive relationships, engagement in healthcare, and Indigenous worldviews. That feeds into the vision that we have of a renewed role for men supporting each other and their families and building wellness and strong communities. And just to emphasize, when we refer to men, we refer to self-identifying men. So anyone who identifies as a man is welcome in the groups. Yeah. And then our work is really driven by our values, and our values consist of, there's 5 of them: relationships, which is fundamental; sanctuary and safe space; brotherhood and connection; journey is a word that we use to refer to our understanding that this work is long and it's often slow, and we're not looking for overnight fixes. We're recognizing that there's a multi-generational and an intergenerational aspect to this work. And then we also recognize that two-eyed seeing is key for us. So what that means is that we're looking at both traditional and Western medical and wellness models and taking the best of both that can be used to support our men in community.
I think an important piece around the work that is being done and the work that we support focuses on three pillars. The first one is to build. It's really focusing on how the communities, how the gatherings or circles of men build solidarity through brotherhood, establishing trust, and really understanding what a positive role model is together, and understanding how that can foster positive role modeling for the community of men, and also the community that the men belong to. The second pillar to that is really focused on promoting, and that's promoting men's health through accessible education, ongoing dialogue between the men, between the organizations that are partnered, the different facilitators or individuals who are welcomed into those circles to continue on with that dialogue. And another obvious focus is around health, expanding that dialogue, and really I guess one of the critical issues on that is men don't like to talk about health, and a lot of times with health concerns they tend to be on the reactive side. So the narrative of Superman comes in where nothing's wrong with me, I'm totally fine, until it's at critical, and then having to deal with that. So where this pillar of promotion really does target is creating that conversation, making it normal to talk about what health is, and begin to introduce the idea of health screenings and the opportunities to be part of those health screenings. The third pillar is really focused on enabling, is really to enable men to regain a sense of pride, both in themselves, in what the role of a man is, the connection to community, and really ultimately the pride of the community on the men, and their role and how that they can actually engage, and really is understanding what that purpose is, and how to foster fulfillment of that purpose throughout all their life. So whether they are an older person, whether they are a younger individual, it's to understand, as Frank had mentioned, it's a lifelong learning. It's a lifelong process of similar to decolonization. The learning path around reconciliation. It's a lifelong learning process. So a lot of the work, these three pillars around building, promoting, and enabling, really do focus on meeting men where they're at on their journey, welcoming them in, and identifying how they can get into that community or that circle of men to be part of that, whether they are just curious about the work that is being done and the initiatives that are going on, or if they're on the other side of the spectrum where they're serious about going into leadership, taking on more of a positive, healthy role model, leadership role in that community. And so it's really meeting people where they're at.
Right.
Yeah, and this, what you can see on screen here is a graphic which shows how we do what we do. So what are the activities that each of the groups participate in to varying degrees? Every group is different, and every group is local, and every group is run by local guys, but they all center around a community gathering. So that means that men are coming together with each other in community, either once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month, or sometimes they struggle and it's once every 2 months, or sometimes it's seasonal and they're coming together more in winter when it's more needed, when times are a bit darker and more challenging, and in summer they're with their families and they're on the land more so. And yeah, those gatherings are really that centerpiece. And what we hear from men in community, and Henry, maybe you can speak more to this as well, is that these gatherings are something that historically used to take place. Men did used to come together as men in community and have discussions and plan activities or hunts or trips or ceremony. And at some point along the way, that was lost. And so we're really working to try to bring that back. Yeah, and other pieces that come in, so a lot of groups do an annual health fair where different providers are invited in. Those providers often struggle to connect with the guys, and the guys won't go to them. But if we hold a gathering with a big barbecue, good smells wafting out into the streets, then a lot of guys come in, and then the providers come in, and they can make that first and necessary connection, whether it's around diabetes or prostate cancer or whatever. A lot of the men also do outings, do annual retreats, online activities, and cultural activities. A think tank is something that our group in Vancouver is really paving the way with. A smaller group of men come together on a weekly basis and do the planning for the gatherings and all the other activities. So it's a very participant-driven approach with the think tank as the driver of that.
I have a question kind of before we move on. So you guys are saying it's very participant-based and participant-led. So I guess my question is kind of, how does this process first get started? Are you approached by, someone from council from a community, or is it just anyone that kind of contacts you, or how does that first initial step work?
Henry, you want to answer that question? Since you're our effing partner? Since you're our effing partner?
Yeah, so for us is like since 2016 it was brought to the attention that we need to have a men's health and focus in our sub-regional meetings with health directors. And so when the dudes came in, they were able to do a presentation and show how working with men and allowing men to come together in a safe way, in a sustainable way. Each community, it's up to them and their readiness, and knowing do they have a facilitator in their community that can commit some time to this and allow them to have a space as well and know the need of the men in the community. So it's based on each community and their readiness.
Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes it's an individual man or a set of men who are driving that. Very often, though, and fascinating for us, is we get called into community by women and by groups of women who are recognizing that men's work is something that needs to happen, that there is a gender-based lens to health challenges and to community challenges that needs to be addressed in a distinct way. And a lot of groups struggle with how to engage with men. We're notoriously bad at engaging as men. Organized, structured programs are things that a lot of men just tend to run away from sometimes. And so one of the strengths of our approach is a more informal, more unstructured model, which is why when you look at the numbers that we've compiled for 2019, these are approximate numbers because we don't have strict attendance requirements. We don't demand commitments from men to show up or to commit to a certain number of sessions. So when we check in with our facilitators, they give us approximate numbers, and we're comfortable to work with those. So in 2019, we had 700 gatherings across BC, and again, we refers to the men in community. More than half of these were in on-reserve communities and coordinated really largely through the efforts of Henry Morgan. And over 500 men participated in these gatherings. Again, more than half of these were in FNHA partner communities, mostly in northern BC. And so you put these together, and that's over 10,000 gatherings attended in this year so far. A dozen groups have their own names and logos. We've got some of the T-shirts here from some of those groups. We'll probably show you those later, and those showcase some of the names that they've come up with and the designs that they've come up with. Dudes Club is a name that works for some groups and maybe not for others. Can be a bit cheesy. That's okay. We're comfortable with that. So we ran train the trainer programs for over 22 communities, and we participated in 15 different support visits and had requests for another 15. And then we had a couple phenomenal annual retreats this year. We've been doing these every year for the last 4 years. And this year we had 30 different communities and 80 men participating in those. And that's really where the men come together, connect to each other, share learnings and best practices, share cultural techniques and ideas, and then go back to their communities stronger.
I think an important piece to note on that is the Dudes Club initiative and the different groups. There isn't a one single pathway to creating a club. One of the most important pieces to that is because of the beautiful diversity of where these groups, these men's gathering circles, clubs, whatever they identify it as, is going to be in a specific nation. It'll be within a specific language group. The protocols and practices of each different club and location are going to be incredibly unique to themselves. And so with our work becomes very tricky in that space. I guess tricky and easy in the same respect is that it is not a prescribed pathway. There's no prescribed practice beyond just very general facilitation resources. And so really what we are doing is empowering these men to take on a leadership role, understand kind of a recipe for success within the first five meetings, if you will, and really leaving the rest open to the nation's practice and protocol, traditional protocols that are there. And again, that reflects a lot of the scheduling and the engagements that the each community has. Maybe they have a significant focus on hunting or traditional practices in the wintertime, where that takes a majority of their time. And so it is completely diverse in that respect, and where the supporting staff really is able to provide more information, more support, is around the trainer. And so these men are coming in together, meeting with each other, learning about what works for them in their community, sharing those best practices as they identify them. And all we're doing is really providing more concrete facilitation methods and engagement practices that could be adapted to the work that they're doing. So.
Hey, sorry, Sandy, you have something to say?
Yeah, and that's what we do. We just basically give them tools that will work for their community and just help them, and they can use whatever they want out of those tools that we give support them with.
I just have a general kind of question here, and it's just kind of been percolating a little bit. I noticed you guys obviously keep record of on reserve versus urban communities. Yeah. So I guess my general question here, and Henry, feel free to jump in as well, is that do you guys notice that is there a difference in the kinds of facilitation activities that you have to use for urban communities versus community? And when I say urban, I'm generally thinking of communities that are more displaced, like a general urban Indigenous population that we have here in Vancouver, as an example, that don't come from one specific nation. They don't necessarily have as much much of an opportunity to engage in on the land activities. So kind of what are your thoughts on that? How do you facilitate that?
It's the way we facilitate is very organic, right? It's the men lead it. We provide what we need to provide for them, and they take what they need.
Yeah. Yeah, but you also you captured it well, Cole. In the urban settings, you don't have one specific nation, and you don't have one specific history of connection to that land. You've got multiple narratives that are coming together, and those narratives are often really even more fraught with the challenges of forced displacement. And we know that a lot of the urban areas, men come and go between community. We also know that a lot of them, we have men who left community when they were young, were forced to leave when they were young, chose to leave, and end up in an urban environment disconnected from culture, community, and land. And so it does manifest itself a little bit differently. I'd say more so it depends on the size of the group as well. We have so our largest group on non-reserve community would be in Gittinmax in Hazelton, BC, and in that group they've got usually about 30 guys who show up, and it has a little bit more of an urban type of feel to it because of that. A lot of the groups that are on reserve communities, we see, these are small towns, small villages, small communities. It's very complex to come together with another group of men when there's things that there's elephants in the room. There's things shared that you haven't talked about, shared histories, complex, convoluted, problematic shared histories. And getting a chance to talk about those for the first time, getting a chance to hear from your neighbor, your friend, your uncle. Maybe he's got a history of sexual abuse that you didn't know about, or even just being able to get that out there is something that then encourages other men to start to process their own trauma and start to share things that may have happened with them. In urban communities, sometimes it can take longer to build that trust.
For example, in Vancouver, in the downtown east side, we have 32 different nations of men. So, and they have, some men know each other, some don't want to know each other. So it's taken a while to build that trust, and trust is really a key factor in how we do the work.
I think in kind of playing off of both of what Sandy and Frank said, is the work being done at community can also be very tricky as well, especially if there is trauma and abusive relationships or history of sexual abuse in there. Bringing men together to do the good work and talk about issues, and whereas in an urban setting you have the diversity of a city that you kind of go back to, whereas in a community you are you're sitting there and potentially seated across from your abuser. And so how do you create, it's navigating that space, and for it's navigating that space, creating a sense of, or establishing trust and safer space, and so it becomes incredibly tricky and convoluted in that sense, especially if it's community led, where some of these men may not have a background in counseling, may not have a certain level of knowledge about how to navigate that conversation in a safe space. So it becomes a very tricky space to deal with. And so with a lot of the train the trainer pieces, it's focusing on the facilitation of that, and to get into a heavier space like that, you never know until you know. So, Henry, you may want to kind of jump into this part, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience with this.
Yeah, I'd like to say, like, what they're saying is pretty true. And looking at when men gather in communities, and it's very challenging. They're small communities, some are bigger communities. It is all dependent on the strength of the facilitator as well to be able to create that safe space, because most of the communities are just working on building trust and relationships with each other, with the men in the community. Like you're saying, it's like there has been a lot of trauma in communities, and there is so much lateral violence in the communities as well, with other things playing a factor, an ongoing thing. Dynamics like colonization, just so many different things and variables, and not even just abuse on its own. It's just even the healthy men are need to be participating as well, right? Not just stereotyping and saying these are people that are just struggling with trauma and addictions. That the healthy men we're trying to engage as well, that are out there working, that are out there providing for their families, but they also need that certain piece of health in their lives too, because most of the time they're out there providing and neglecting their own health and just working full bore.
Yeah. Thanks, Henry. That's a really great point as well. I think that all of us men, we need these spaces to come and to connect with one another, or to even just to be able to share who we are with other men. I think that there's an innate strength in that, and an innate understanding amongst one another that, a lot of people, I count myself within that crowd, you don't necessarily get that. I was the only boy born to a family of 5 women and 1 single mother. So you can imagine it took a while for me to find spaces where I could connect with other men and share those experiences. And so I think it's important that we recognize that as well. So thank you, Henry, in that even if aren't necessarily, maybe you're not outwardly struggling in the same way that another person is, regardless of what that kind of manifests itself as, men can still find value in attending these conversations and participating and being able to connect. I like that point that you brought up as well, Dega, about or that we all kind of brought up about, is that difference between urban and on reserve or rural communities. There is that anonymity that can exist in large circles or urban, and that can sometimes be insular and kind of help you to take that first step. Do you know what I mean? Because like you said, at the end of the day, you can share with this circle, and then you can kind of go back into your own little life. And in smaller communities, that's not always possible. Yeah. So, thanks, guys.
Yeah, and something that's key there is recognizing it's a journey, as we've discussed. So we've got a quote from our elder Sandy Lambert, the one and only.
There you go.
On the screen here. I'll read it because you have to quote famous people. So, so it's part of the healing journey. When we get together, the dudes feel so safe. They start talking about their past lives, and it all starts coming out. And we want to emphasize there the consistency of coming together. We know that when we start to come together, if it's just once, if it's just twice, one-off events may be useful, may provide some support, but what we really want to push is for there to be a commitment to ongoing, consistent gatherings in community where men can continue to come together. One of our key principles is no judgment. And that's a tough one. It was tough for me when I first started in this work. It's tough for all of us. I mean, judging is something that we naturally do as humans, of each other all the time, of ourselves. And having that space of no judgment allows for us to start to process and recognize that even if there are wrongs that have been done in the group, from one member to another, from somebody's family to somebody else, we can heal from those. Not right away, but with time. With time, we can.
And another big part is we talk about leaving your armor at the door. So every man has armor to protect themselves. So when they come into the safe place, we tell them to leave their armor at the door. Whatever happens out there stays out there, and that gives them the ability to come in and be able to talk and relax and have those four walls, and whatever comes in those four walls stays in those four walls. So it's really important that we take off that armor.
Mm-hmm. I think an important piece too is to understand the, as we mentioned before, regardless of where these circles or places, locations are happening, especially with the urban sites, is with that amalgamation of so many nations and practices and protocols, with the expansion of Dudes Club and individual nations to different urban settings, having being curious or having an interest in what this could look like for them. We do ensure that the focus of the practice and protocol remain to the land that it's on, regardless of where that is. And as Dr. Vicky Smythe had kind of quoted that in Indigenous contexts, it's part of everyday life to live in community. That is how people survived, and so this idea of community is also the definition of community is starting to kind of decolonize in itself, and it's this interesting space of what does community mean for as an individual, what does community mean within that group, and how do we foster that sense of community. So I think what is critical around that is that the diversification of those groups include not only the cultural aspects of it. I know with the Vancouver gathering, there's as Sandy mentioned, how many? 32 different Indigenous to Canada groups, and that's not just. It doesn't just end there. There are people from around the world that have connections to, all different ancestry that make up that space. And the beauty of that is that they're acknowledging there is still traditional protocol to this land. And so the beauty of just allowing and allowing themselves to be part of that experience. A quote by one of the dudes, Anthony, said, "You can't have healthy communities or healthy families without healthy men." And coming back to that narrative, kind of playing off understanding what the narratives are currently and trying to disband those and reestablish new definitions to that, go beyond just the cultural aspect or the racial aspect, or and it does also come down to the age, the demographics that are that we're seeing there in Vancouver gathering. One of the biggest medicines that we have there is how old is?
I think he's 8 now.
He's 8.
Sorry,
So the previous picture, over there, panicking,
has when he shows up, the entire space changes. The behavior of the men change because it goes back into role modeling, so when, there's an argument, people are, naturally people can get heated, and with a whole spectrum of different circumstances that can arise. And, when you have a young person there, a child, a youth, it's so beautiful to watch, 42 men who may not have a background or understanding or have been in a position of mentorship or fatherhood or in that space and become such a natural caregiver. And just to ensure that, and so he's a grounder in many sense, in the same way that that Sandy is a grounder to the work that is being done. This little one provides so much, and I think that's talking about healthy communities. He's the youngest participant member in here, and he's actually watching how he's going to make how he's going to act in the future based on the role modeling that he's been given.
And he's been coming to our dudes club since he was 2 years old. So we've seen him grow up.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Daga was referring to the fundamental importance of both our elders and our juniors. Another one of our elders, Pops, in our Smithers group, he says, "We're not political, we're not religious, we are dudes together. In these current times, it's not easy to be a man. What's helping me is having the closeness of other people." Our elders really hold space, hold groups together in a lot of ways. And of course, that's challenging because being elders, a lot of them are facing their own health challenges, and being able to get there and be there in the group is difficult. But what we see is that through this process of having these community gatherings, we're supporting a process of passing of knowledge from elders to others, that transfer of experience and wisdom, which does happen anyways in community, and there's ways in a lot of communities where it happens so much better than we could ever plan or organize to support it to happen. But there's times when having a little bit of support for that is helpful.
I think to add on to that is, with the Dudes Club, clearly we have a strong connection to Indigenous protocols and practices. And so when we talk about that elder knowledge being transferred down, it doesn't have to remain, the romanticizing of Indigenous practices and culture. There are men from, as we mentioned before, from across Turtle Island and all walks of this earth. And so that knowledge of an elder, what it means to be an elder, that is transferred down. So there's a incredibly rich abundance of knowledge that is coming from an international, I always kind of refer to it as like a UN level practice that we are receiving in engaging with these men. So
And that's a good moment, I think, to point out Henry's beautiful shirt, which is from our partners in Australia. It's from an organization called IUI, the Institute of Urban Indigenous Health, based in Brisbane, Australia. Shout out to our brothers and uncles working over there. And you can see on Henry's right shoulder is the the flag of the Aboriginal people in Australia. And then on Henry's sexy left shoulder is the flag of the Torres Strait Islander, another Aboriginal group of people in Australia. And we have a lot to learn from them as well, and having dialogue, not just here with other Turtle Island nations, but across the planet is really important. And especially as we're heading into phase critical with our planet. We need to tap into, in Australia, they've got 50,000 years of contiguous cultural learning to share, sustainable land relationships. Here we've got, that we know of from an archaeological perspective, 14 or 15,000 years of learnings. And to pull from, and this is just one of those many opportunities that are out there for us to start using that, and the land is so important to us. Another quote from another one of our dudes, Derek: "Being in the city, I've lost all connection to nature. The calmness is waking something up in me." That's a quote from while we were on retreat. canoe journey we had.
Loon Lake.
Yep.
Nice. Very nice.
Oh, yeah, Loon Lake, of course, is the UBC research facility.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess some parts around what makes the Dudes Club unique is really a sustained presence in the downtown east side since 2010 and across BC since 2014. It's the effective partnerships, relationships, and ongoing dialogue between public and private organizations and the partners that we have. Such as the First Nations Health Authority, Public Health Service Agency, Provincial Health Service Agency, thank you, and other discussions as noted in Fraser Health, Northern Health, DCH is Vancouver Coastal Health.
It's a lot of acronyms.
I'm saying VGH, so and other provincial health authorities, and again the ongoing connections with organizations that are curious about the work that we're doing, see a value and impact to how we are doing it, and when I say we, it's really the men. We are only there again to support their work and the good work that is happening. And when we say the men, it's really that's what we have, is that strong social capital, and especially amongst our Indigenous communities of men. The focus has been the 40 through 60 demographic, and then really it comes down to the individuals within the community being focused, determined, and willing to be those community health workers and understand what, because nobody can raise their hand and say they are a community health expert without being in the community. And so it is critical that the grassroots practice stays within the grassroots, and that we're supporting that work as it goes along, and really around those supportive relationships, especially with the most isolated northern communities, where there is a lot less engagement, communication, incredibly so when in the winter months. Yeah, so I think a lot of that is focusing on just ensuring that when those men come together, it's there is no judgment. It's to leave your armor at the door, as has been mentioned before.
Yeah, really basic principles. Third basic principle we could add to this that we see as a necessity for any group is that they have a code of conduct. We don't set that code of conduct, so we wouldn't put it up here because we don't know what.
Each community can be different.
Yeah.
100%.
So yeah, we go in there and say, okay, what would you guys like to have on your code of conduct? And that's what they follow. So we don't tell them what they need to have it on.
And just to iterate, when we say we go in there, it's we never actually enter a community or engage, even with any of the visits, and they have to come from the community asking us to do a presentation, asking for support. So we're not reporting, we're not policing or identifying. We only come in as they request. So, and that's a huge piece, is that because when we leave, the work still has to get done. So in case anyone wasn't confused about what we do, here's get confused. So this is the point in the presentation where normally we'd stand up and point some things out, and but if you can zoom in on your screens for those of you who are out there, this just gives a little bit of a sense of how we're currently structured. You can see there's two colors of arrows. One is a funding relationship, but more importantly is the orange arrow, wherein we provide, when invited, as Dega mentioned, training, tools, mentoring, coaching, planning,
and networking, connecting guys to each other, also connecting health directors who are usually women, and health community engagement coordinators who are also usually women, connecting them to each other so they can learn about what's working with the local men's group and what's not. The bubble to the left of the Dudes Club and Canadian Men's Health Foundation, which is our umbrella organization currently, is FNHA. That's by far our most important relationship. And together we've got about 30 sites that are operating now, and we're in the midst of, we're a year and a half through our 2-year pilot. We've got a 1-year extension on that pilot, and discussions in progress to annualize that funding, which is something that we're very hopeful for. Each group can receive, upon application and reporting, a grant of $7,500, and with that $7,500, that's what they use to run their group for the year. Very minimal funding, very high impact. That's why we really push for it to be annualized within the health authority's budget. Underneath that, you can see how we work with other urban sites. We've always got a local partner, whether that's Positive Living North, whether that's a local friendship center. There's a local partner who supports the work as well, and which often hosts and which often helps with providing a facilitator. Vancouver is unique. We've got our biggest group by far in Vancouver, partnered with the Urban Indigenous Health and Healing Cooperative, which is now Kalala Lalem Butterfly House. Mm-hmm. And then we've got some really exciting discussions going on with Fraser Health. We've got an exciting partnership also with Movember. Movember funded 3 years of research that the Dudes Club embarked on with UBC from 2013 to 2016. We'll share some of those findings with you as well. And Movember is currently working to support the development of in-community men's groups in Manitoba and Ontario, and that's work that DEGA is driving forward. And then above that, we've got a bubble for PHSA and our work that launched in early 2019 in provincial corrections facilities for the first time. So it was a tough decision for us to think about whether we wanted to be working inside prisons, but we consistently kept hearing from our men that the need was there, and that the need for connection was there, the need for sharing was there, the need for health information was there, and most importantly, the need for, I mean, we're talking about facilities with recidivism rates of 75%. So men come out of the facility and go into community and end up going back into the facility, because when they're in community, they're not connecting to anything. They're not connecting to each other. They're falling back into old habits and patterns. They often have nowhere to stay. They're sleeping in transient housing, semi-homeless, mm-hmm. And getting back involved in sometimes addictions, etc. So moving in there was not a decision that we took lightly, but it's been very important, and that work is now poised to grow into other correctional facilities across the province. Something else to note there is that the facility that we're in Prince George, unfortunately, 80% of the inmates there are identified as Indigenous, which is absurd. Grossly overrepresented within that system, in the same way that we know that Indigenous children and families are grossly overrepresented in the child welfare systems and corrections systems. We need to, I think, call those out as not always being what they say they are, certainly not historically. And we know that in a lot of other communities in Saskatchewan, we're looking at more than 90% of inmates being of Indigenous background, and other facilities around BC not quite at 80%, but still incredibly high. So, and if anybody has questions about this graphic or the specifics of it, happy to dive in further.
Great.
this just shows a little bit more our current state relationships with provincial health authorities. And this is, we rate these kind of new, growing, mature relationships. So our relationship with FNHA is by far our most mature relationship, and something that we believe really should serve as a model for relationships with other health authorities. And those discussions are in process. We've often done a number of activities together. Sometimes they're one-offs, annual events. Sometimes they're presentations and learning sharings. And a little bit more detail here, if anyone's curious, just as to the specific activities that we're engaged with each of these health authorities. Or maybe Henry, if there's anything that you want to kind of touch on related to our relationship.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, when you were mentioning about the 30 communities with FNHA, that is just the northern piece of BC, right? Where there's 55 nations in the northern region, and 30 of those responded. So that's not even looking at the provincial response. That's just a northern response, and within the 2 years here.
Great.
I think that's all I had to add to that with for that piece. And just looking at, I was trying to get on a while ago when you were talking about having men go on the land and being a part of that. I think when you look at colonization and when that happened, a lot of the things that happened was, well, we weren't occupying the land, therefore we're taking the land. So, and when we're working with our men to get back onto the land and looking at their territories and looking at their families, like for myself, example is like occupying my territory and knowing where that is, hunting, fishing, those kind of things, increasing the knowledge. We all have that knowledge already, but having and extraction of our forests and mining has limited our ability to be on the land. So I really think that having our men returning to that role of protector and provider, and also like that involves protecting our lands and our families and our generations to come.
Yeah, it's a really good point there, Henry. I think especially in the face of a lot of the ecological disasters that we will be facing or that we are currently facing, depending on where you're located. I know some nations are experiencing a lot more of this now than others, just based on kind of where you're situated. But yeah, and I think that's going to be an ongoing challenge that hopefully will be tackled in, from a community to community standpoint. Kind of how do we as men continue to walk that way in the face of a really contemporary, a changing world? You know what I mean? Where those environments might not be.
So the next slide is the 3-year research funding that we received from November. So we had a participation of 150 men, frontline workers in Vancouver, Prince George, and Smithers. So, and also we publicized in the Canadian Family Physician in June of 2016. So the demographics were the mean age was 46.8 years. 77.3% of men are over 40 years. Unstable housing in the past month is 64%. Unemployment in the past 6 months was 56%. Volunteering, 40% of our men volunteered less than 10 hours a week. The family status, married, 11.4%. Children, 58.7%. Children live with you, 4.5%, which is a very low number. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the chart on your right, Indigenous, 63%, Caucasian, which we don't like, is 25%, and other is 12%.
Yeah, and so that was in the 2013 to 2016 period. Those numbers have changed a little bit, and those numbers, of course, are different when we're in different places around the province. One of the things that we find is that Indigenous men derive particular benefit from this group, and I think that's led to an increased indigenization of our work, and also recognizing that there's just such tremendous value and learning for us to draw from. And so the three colors that you see here on the left, the yellow represents the Indigenous men, the red represents the white guys like me, and the gray represents other guys. And what we can see is that when we ask them about trust, when we ask them about social and peer support, and when we ask them about connection to heritage and culture, that the Indigenous men demonstrated increased benefit. And the other thing that is important is the consistent attendance. The more that men attend, the more that we see positive benefits. And that's a really simple formula for us to communicate to our facilitators around the province. And we also know, as we mentioned earlier, that doesn't mean getting guys to sign up or commit to 10 sessions or to commit to come every week. It means creating an environment that the guys want to come to, making something fun. Whether that's having cribbage tournaments or playing bingo or
making a meal together, or just being on the land and going fishing or hunting.
Yeah. So,
if I may, what's represented on the y-axis here in these graphs? Is that like did you guys do like a survey or something? This
is part of the survey. We did a qualitative survey in those 3 years, and so quality of life was 4.37 out of 5. So it's all.
They were just asked to like rate their. That's okay.
Exactly.
I see.
So 5 is strongly agree,
5,
and
right.
1 is strongly disagree.
So the numbers are really high there.
We're piloting a new evaluation method now with communities, which has 2 different forms. So in our partnership with FNHA, we've got an online eval that every single dude can fill out on their own. Not all of our dudes are digitally savvy always, so that method doesn't always work. So sometimes we ask facilitators to support with that. Sometimes we ask health directors to support with that. The other thing that we do is sometimes ask questions of the group together. So we'll ask a question, for example, do you feel that, you've been coming to this group for a year now, do you feel that your health has improved? We'll ask guys to answer with their hands. So 5 being strongly agree, 4 kind of agree, 3 neutral, 2 disagree. And then humor is one of the biggest tools in our work. And so we let the guys know that if they strongly disagree and they think that we've screwed that up, then they can answer 1. So
I think an important piece to kind of reiterate around this is the demographic that is being represented in this is the 40 to 60 age range. It'll be really interesting, especially with the expansion of the work that is being done. And the focus is bringing in that younger demographic. We are actively looking at new ways to expand upon that and have different groups that are being encompassed in that work. So it'll be very interesting to see and really to engage to develop a baseline from the moment they begin joining, to see what that would mean based on the the different age range and demographic that we will encompass. So.
Yeah, I think that's, we all have an innate, sense of the value of these circles, but it helps greatly to have this qualitative data, because then you can go to your partners and say, this is that value, this is how we're showing it. You know what I mean?
So our current sites, we have 42 Dudes Club sites, 29 First Nation Health in the northern BC, 7 urban BC, and 2 urban Canada, and 3 in the prison system in Prince George.
Mhm.
And I think to note on some of the national expansion of this, with the different partnering organizations and partnerships that we have, there's been a really healthy uptake and interest in what this will look like, especially in Manitoba. I know within the city of Vancouver, around the Britannia community, Strathcona area, there's I know we're successfully launching in 2020 and another dudes club there, and then as well there's been some really great interest within Seattle, Kings County. So it is expanding significantly fast, and it's looking at how again to serve and meet the needs of those champions in the work that they're doing.
Mhm.
Yeah, so on that note, some of the other groups that are still in a planning process, and again, these groups, some of them will identify as dudes clubs, some won't. One thing that Sandy always reminds us of is that this work is not ours; it's yours. The tools that we develop, the knowledge bundle that we share with communities, these are for communities to use and adapt in ways that work best for them. And so some will decide that this name and logo and brand is useful for them in convening their groups together, and others will decide that something else is more useful, and so we'll support them in different ways.
And I think that to speak to that it's for the dudes club in general, around how do we support and get that branding, if you will, for someone who may be in Montreal, that takes a trip out to Vancouver and has an immediate connection, and I have a brotherhood here, I can attend. And so we're navigating that space around how do we keep it inclusive and allow everyone to have their kind of their own individual unique work that they do.
Yeah.
Actually, we've talked about most of this, but just one note here: the Vancouver group, huge numbers of guys who come out. We've recently shifted to a newer location, which is beautiful. And if anyone ever wants to come and visit us, please do. It's at
262 Powell.
Yeah.
262.
Sorry, 626.
626.
Powell.
Powell and Princess. And from that location, we've got every single week a group of guys. They call themselves the Dude Squad, and they head out onto the streets and support with spreading some good messages about health and well-being, doing some cleanup, whether it's in Oppenheimer Park or nearby areas, and just kind of being on the street safety and wellness patrol.
Great.
So, yeah. I was presenting to a group the other day, and I mentioned that. So I grew up here, and I grew up with a solid public education and educated parents, and yet for me growing up, I had no idea that any of these places existed around BC. And in fact, not only was I not taught that, but I was really deliberately taught that these places didn't exist, and that these 203 Indigenous nations in BC and 50 languages weren't around anymore. We were taught that these were historical. It took until a few years ago in my professional life for me to change that understanding. And so looking at this map of where we are, the red homes representing already organized dudes clubs, and the hiking dude representing where we've had substantive discussions. There's an incredible diversity and just amazing locations all around the province.
That's great. I want to take a second too, Frank, to say, I didn't mean to outwardly laugh at your current knowledge base.
No, please.
I'm sorry that came out. It's inappropriate, but it's more of a response to to the state of the education system as opposed to your personal experience. I just wanted to bring that up.
Laughter is very
I laughed
appropriate.
at you.
Yeah. Yeah, we need to laugh at each other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we do a lot of laughter.
Great.
It's healing.
Yeah, so just I guess while we're having some technical upgrades, this what you see in front of you is a list of our partnerships throughout the year, throughout the years, and some of the great communications and initiatives that are that Dudes Club finds ourselves in supporting, enriching their current practices, or collaboratively establishing new initiatives that are either currently in those spaces or are coming to a community near you. So there's again a lot of the work that is done is focusing on bringing the word of the men in the community to this space. I think that's the richness of what I myself, and I'm confident I can speak on behalf of the others, is this social capital that is there. When any of us go into a community, or any of us go into these organizations, or at a discussion table or decision table, we are not representing Dudes Club. We are representing those communities, and many a times our focus is to ensure that those community representatives, those champions, are sitting at the table with us, and speaking on behalf of themselves. So it's really, we're only echoing what is being given to us, appointed to us, or the direction that these men are asking for, or steering us in that direction. And I think the beauty of our work is to liaise between, when a nation asks us for, we want to connect to the corrections, or we want to connect to the overdose, the opioid crisis response community. How do we do that? That's where we become reactive in saying, okay, let's get going. And so that work is again really heartfelt and really meaningful to be able to be at that place. And I think there's so much honor when seated at those tables, is that we are tasked to do that work, right? So it is very heartfelt, connected.
Yeah.
One partnership to point out quickly here, among the mix of the others, with the Ending Violence Association of BC. Tracy Porteous, their longtime executive director, is one of our advisory council members, and we really do recognize the role that we have to play in addressing violence against women and children and families and men, and that we are an important part of that dialogue together. So these are just a few last quotes to share. We don't really have any more content in the presentation, but certainly open for other dialogue and questions.
Should we read them?
Yeah.
Sure.
So I feel inspired coming here and being with the men who want to change ourselves and our communities. There's a lot of strong men, and I am inspired to go back to my community and work a lot harder. I have a passion for giving back to the guys who are struggling with the same thing as I did for many years. This is what we First Nation men strive for: connection to our culture, our land, each other. I grew up in a village of Fort Babine. I saw unity. Everybody was together and happy. What happened? We struggle today. We're caught in the turmoil. We're not ready to combat. Let's unite. Our strength will come back. Let's become a becoming. Let's start. Those come from communities and the men.
Mm-hmm. Great. Here we are, questions. So if you have any questions quickly, I have a few of my own, and we'll kind of let the chat box populate a little bit. If you have anything, please feel free to send it in to us, and we can address it on the air. That's awesome. So one of my first questions, and this is just personal kind of curiosity, is how often do you guys do your annual retreats, and what sort of things do you guys do at those retreats? Like the Loon Lake one, right? Just as an example. Annually, right? No, you got me there.
Well, no, actually, we can speak to that a little bit more. Sorry.
That's okay.
Really, the retreat and the trainers are different, right? The train the trainers. How many did we do this year? 12 different train the trainer sessions. So we're calling in different communities to come together to do those engagement pieces. And yeah, the retreat is a little bit different, where we're bringing men out back onto the land, which is a little bit unique in that space.
So are those events then kind of geared towards more the urban sites then, to have a chance for them to connect with land, or are they open for everyone to attend that's in a dude club site, I suppose?
It's a mix. We've got so the Northern Guys Gathering, which Henry organized, we had 2 so far, so that's more of a biannual actually. And that's the facilitators and elders from each community coming together. So that's a bit more of a high level focus on skill development and on sharing of culture and best practices, and of an experiential component of being on the land together. And then the retreats that we run here in the Vancouver area are for a mix of our urban Vancouver dudes together with the Vancouver and other lower mainland facilitators, and we bring in facilitators from around the province and country as well. We feel that just having the facilitators or champions, as we call them, champions and elders, on their own isn't a complete picture, and we always want to challenge ourselves to hold space together with the men, even when there's varying degrees of functioning and engagement in the process, but that's something that we know that they then face in their own communities, and so practicing that is key together.
I think an important piece about the last retreat that we had, we actually, with the new kind of conversations that happened with the Dakota Ojibwe Child and Family Services from Manitoba, there was an invite for one of their representatives to attend. In addition to that, our partnership with Movember, one of the champions from the urban Winnipeg site, along with Toronto, from Namarez, was invited as well. So I know that the Winnipeg and Toronto actually flew over and got to experience what this would look like, kind of evolved, right? And kind of give the aspirations as to what this would look like for them. Included in that would be Seattle, and so it's a really great opportunity for new clubs, new gatherings, or individuals who are interested and really committed to do the work to see what this could look like for themselves too. And that's, I think, the beautiful part of that is you're getting to see how big this brotherhood is, right? And to connect with the guys from across province, across Canada, and to share in that space, and there's really no difference. I think that's what we want to promote, right? That I could go to Toronto, I could go to Seattle, I can go to up towards Takla, and that engagement is no different. You feel connected, you feel as if, and you are ultimately welcome there, and reminded of how important your presence is there. So,
They roll out the red carpet basically.
oh my
for
God,
us.
no kidding.
I mean, when I went to Haida Gwaii, they had a buffet and they had every fish that you could think of: halibut, and salmon, and just everything, and deer meat and moose meat, and it just went on. It was just amazing. So when we go up to these northern sites, we're treated very well, and we get to have that cultural food that we don't get in the city, right? 'Cause where do you get moose from?
Yeah.
You have to go to the store, you have to buy it, or even buffalo meat, So it's very, very nice to get away from the city sometimes.
Speaking of Haida Gwaii, I can share that this is the name and logo of our group in Skidegate, Gagagai, which means canoe pathway in Haida.
I'll share them all.
Sure.
This is our Smithers. Camera, my God, can you see it?
Yep, you're on.
So this is our Smithers, their logo. And the gentleman that did this was Indigenous from South America, who has recently, a few years passed away. So they decided to do their own logo.
This is a bowl of pine cones. The one that.
So this is our partnership with FNA. That's what I call you guys now. First Nation Health Authority and Dudes Club. Inspiring Brotherhood Warriors for Northern Men's Wellness.
And the last one is actually my favorite, as far as the color goes, is the shirt that was given out to all the participants at our Northern Indigenous Guys Gathering that was up in Camp Friendship, Prince George, in April 2019. And kind of behind there kind of outlines and shows all the different clubs and communities that attended that space. So it's really nice to see, and even in whenever you travel. I remember I was in Winnipeg, and this is prior to establishment of any of the gathering locations there, and I walked in a mall and someone was wearing a Dudes Club shirt. Hey, what do you?
Yeah.
And go up, and it's an immediate like, where'd you get that? Who did? And they're like, oh yeah, well I got it connected, and
Yeah.
it's like that, and it's that immediate sense of connection and brotherhood, right? So it's and again, it goes right back to isolation, right? And it breaks that chain that you immediately want to connect with them, and even if you're just curious as to how and why, right? It breaks that. It gives the opportunity to speak and connect and share a little bit of your time and space. And I think it's just the practice of not being shy or afraid of making that connection.
So we have one question here. We just have a couple minutes, so we'll try and kind of get this. You mentioned the Dudes Club is open to all self-identified men. Do you try to create safer spaces for trans men? And if so, maybe could you briefly illuminate how that works?
No, we just accept them as a man, and that's just it,
And that's it.
That's it, because we do have a transgendered man up in Smithers, and we just accept them as men.
And that's it.
There's no judgment. There's no
Special treatment.
No, not at all. And I think the beauty of that is, obviously, there's people who have judgment. People have old narratives and practices that make comments and I've witnessed that in our Vancouver club. Someone made a inappropriate comment, and 6 of them jumped on them and reminded, like, you can leave if you want to continue that. Like, we don't do that here. This is a safer space, and there are individuals who self-identify with all different kind of gender and gender diversity in there, and part of the LGBTQ community within our groups, and it is supported right? It is supported and reminded that you are part. And if you identify as a man, and the work needs to be done regardless of where and how you came, the simple fact is you're here, and you're part of that healing, and you're part of that group, and that love and connection is equal. It doesn't change, and so it gets people are reminded very fast of to leave your armor at the door, but also leave any judgment that you have. It stays out there because we got work to do.
So Henry, do you have any last thing to add or anything to say before we kind of sign off here?
I just want to thank you guys for allowing me to be a part of this. I know with the dudes themselves, they've been able to provide a structure and support for communities, and also to support of our facilitators, and they've been a key component in starting these groups in communities and guiding me, myself, and how to support multiple communities at once. So yeah, it is a challenge, and it's great to have great leaders like the dudes.
Like you.
Awesome. So with that, I think we'll sign off. As a brief plug for the Learning Circle, we have 2 more sessions coming, or we have several sessions coming up. We got one on language next week, and then into December we have sessions on kind of the healthy science attachment, or healthy science of attachment and emotion. We're going to end the year with healthy sexuality, and I almost forgot. We have a session on Indigenous leadership, or leadership through an Indigenous lens, next week. So if anybody's interested in tuning into those, we'd love to have you join us. LJ, thank you for sharing your teachings. It was excellent. I assume that's directed towards you guys, not to me, from LJ. And I just wanted to say on behalf of the Learning Circle, thank you, Henry, and thank Frank, Dega, and Sandy. Thank you very much for joining us today. I feel like I learned a lot. Even just sitting in circle, in a digital circle with all of you. So I appreciate it.
And so traditionally with the dudes clubs, what here is what we do in Musqueam. We end our clubs by saying Heit Schweika. So Heit Schweika.
Which means cool man.
Very cool.
So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.